Facts, not perspectives. Her eyes narrowed. Are you questioning my honesty? Andy held her gaze. I'm questioning contradictions. For example, you told Oprah you and Harry were married 3 days before the official wedding in a private ceremony. But the Archbishop of Canterbury himself later clarified that wasn't a legal marriage, just an exchange of vows. Do you see how that looks? Misleading. A hush fell over the audience. Meghan leaned forward, her voice sharp. What Harry and I shared privately was sacred. Whether the Church of England calls it legal or not is irrelevant. What mattered was our commitment. Andy nodded, but his smile carried a hint of steel. But you didn't say that to Oprah. You said, quote, "We were married before the wedding. Millions of people believed you. When the head of the church corrects you publicly, that's not semantics. That's a problem." Meghan's nostrils flared. You're twisting it. You sound just like the British press, desperate to pick apart my words instead of focusing on the bigger picture of what I endured. Andy raised a brow, but his tone remained calm. Well, let's stick with your words then. In that same interview, you claimed you had your passport and keys taken away, that you were trapped inside the palace. Yet, records show you attended multiple public events, traveled abroad, even vacationed. How does that add up? The studio audience let out a ripple of murmurs. Meghan shifted in her seat, her composure cracking just slightly. Do you understand what it's like to live in a gilded cage? Andy, just because I was allowed to appear in public doesn't mean I was free. Every move was monitored, every step controlled. You wouldn't understand. Andy gave a small laugh, though it was void of humor. Maybe not. But what I do understand is inconsistency. You've painted yourself as both completely powerless and completely in control. Depending on which interview you're giving, and people notice that. Meghan's eyes flashed with irritation. People notice what they want to notice. I have nothing to apologize for. I told my story, and I will continue to do so on my terms. If the public can't grasp nuance, that's their problem, not mine. Her dismissive tone sent a ripple of unease through the audience. Andy leaned forward, his voice dropping into something quieter but sharper. So when critics say, you've monetized victimhood, the Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, Harry's memoir, are they also just failing to grasp nuance? The temperature in this room plummeted. Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line. That accusation is beneath you, Andy. We've built platforms to amplify voices that have been silenced, to highlight causes that matter. That's not monetizing. That's service. Andy swirled his drink, eyes fixed on her. Service that just happens to come with million-dollar checks, book sales, and glossy PR deals. Quite a coincidence. Meghan's composure cracked further. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. Do you mock every guest who tries to make a difference? Or is it just me? Andy didn't blink. I don't mock anyone. I hold people accountable. Especially when they hold themselves up as symbols of authenticity while playing by celebrity rules. The audience deserves the truth, Meghan. Not just your truth. The audience audibly gasped. Meghan sat back in her chair, her face flushed, her hands gripping the armrests. For the first time all evening, the mask of polished calm seemed to slip. Maybe, Andy added coolly, it's not the British tabloids or the royal family or even Hollywood that's the problem. Maybe, just maybe, it's you. Meghan's eyes widened, her face pale, then quickly flushed with rage. She opened her mouth to respond, but for a moment, no words came. The Duchess of Sussex, usually so quick, so controlled, was visibly rattled. Andy took a slow sip from his cocktail, letting the silence stretch, letting the cameras drink in every flicker of emotion on Meghan's face. The audience sat frozen, not daring to move, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a reckoning, and the final act was still to come. When the cameras came back from commercial, Meghan sat rigid in her chair. Her face betrayed the strain of holding herself together, her blazer perfectly straightened, but her eyes burning. Andy shuffled his notes, leaned back in his chair, and smiled, not with warmth, but with the confidence of a man who knew he had his guest cornered. "So, Meghan," Andy began, his voice calm, almost conversational, "we've talked about your marriage, the Oprah interview, your acting career. Let's talk about perception. A lot of people out there feel you've burned bridges with almost everyone. Your father, your sister, the palace staff, even longtime friends. Why do you think that keeps happening?" Meghan's head snapped toward him, her tone sharp. "Because people sell lies, Andy. They betray trust for a headline or a payday. It's not me, it's them. Every single time." Andy nodded slowly, swirling the ice in his glass. "So, you're saying the common denominator in all of these fractured relationships isn't you?" The audience let out a collective, "Ooh!" Meghan's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. "I will not sit here and be psychoanalyzed by someone who profits off gossip. I've spent my life trying to rise above toxic people in toxic institutions." Andy leaned forward now, his voice steady but with a razor edge. "Toxic people? Toxic institutions? Or anyone who doesn't bend to your narrative?" Her face flushed. "That's insulting and frankly sexist." Andy set his glass down with deliberate calm. "No, Meghan, this isn't sexism. This is accountability. And if you're looking for someone to blame for every broken relationship, every contradiction in your story, maybe it's time to look in the mirror." The studio was dead silent. Meghan's hands gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. Her voice trembled, but with fury rather than fear. "You don't know me, Andy. You don't know what I've been through." Andy's smirk faded, replaced by an expression of pure resolve. "I don't need to know you personally, Meghan. I just have to look at the pattern. You were a moderately successful actress. You married into the most famous family in the world. And, from that moment on, you turned every grievance into a headline, every personal dispute into content. You built a brand not on who you are, but on who you married." The blow landed. Meghan inhaled sharply, her eyes wide. "That is absolutely outrageous," she whispered. Andy pressed on, his voice now booming across the studio. "You call yourself a duchess, but you have no role in the monarchy. You claim independence, but you live off the privileges that title gave you. You say you want privacy, but you've done more interviews, podcasts, and documentaries than anyone else in that family. Tell me, Meghan, what exactly are you without Harry's last name?" Gasps erupted from the audience. Meghan's face crumpled for the first time, the sheen of control evaporating. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned forward, her voice breaking. "How dare you? After everything I've endured, how dare you reduce me?" To just Andy cut her off, his tone slicing through her words. "How dare you reduce everyone else, Kate, William the Queen, to villains in your story, so you can play the eternal victim? You weren't pushed out, Meghan. You walked out and you've been cashing in ever since." The camera zoomed in as Meghan's tears began to fall, her face contorted with humiliation and rage. The silence in the studio was suffocating. "You're jealous," Andy continued, his voice now lower, more measured, but lethal. Jealous of William and Kate, jealous of the respect they have earned, the love they inspire, the grace they show under the same spotlight you claimed nearly destroyed you. The difference is, they chose duty. You chose drama. Meghan shook her head violently at her voice cracking as she tried to speak. That's not true. That's not fair. Andy didn't flinch. Fair? Life in the royal family isn't about fair. It's about responsibility. And you turned yours into a brand. A brand built on complaints, contradictions, and cash. The tears were flowing freely now. Meghan pulled out her microphone, fumbling to detach it as her hand shook. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between host and guest as history unfolded in front of them. "This is over," Meghan said finally, her voice shaking. "With rage and humiliation. I will not sit here and be attacked like this." Andy leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm. "No, Meghan, you're not being attacked. You're being exposed. There's a difference." She rose abruptly, tossing the microphone onto the chair with a sharp crack. Her heels clicked against the studio floor as she strode toward the exit, her shoulders rigid. The camera followed her until she disappeared behind the curtain. Andy turned slowly back to the audience and the cameras. His expression was cool, unshaken. "Well," he said, voice dripping with finality, "I guess that's one way to end an interview." The studio erupted, half in applause, half in stunned murmurs. The audience had just witnessed what would go down as one of the most explosive interviews in late-night history. Andy straightened his notes, glanced at his cocktail, and looked straight into the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was Meghan Markle. We'll be right back after this." The lights dimmed, the theme music swelled, and the segment ended. But the fallout was only just beginning. But here's the question. Did Andy go too far, or did Meghan finally face the accountability she's been avoiding? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss more dramatic showdowns like this. What happens when a duchess walks into Bravo Studios expecting another smooth, flattering interview, only to face a host unwilling to play along? Tonight, Meghan Markle thought she was steering the conversation. Andy Cohen had other plans. What began as a polite late-night chat quickly unraveled into one of the most combative interviews Bravo has ever aired. Under the shimmering lights of Watch What Happens Live, Andy Cohen shuffled his note cards with practiced ease. The room buzzed with anticipation, the kind that hinted something unpredictable was about to break. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andy said, flashing his trademark grin, "tonight's guest has made headlines around the globe. Please welcome the Duchess of Sussex herself, Meghan Markle." The audience clapped politely, though without the roar reserved for Bravo's A-list favorites. Meghan entered in a tailored black blazer and sleek trousers, posture perfect, stride deliberate. She smiled, a calculated smile, camera-ready but cool. "Andy," she said smoothly, shaking his hand. "Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here." But the word "thrilled" sounded rehearsed, more press release than genuine. Andy noticed. So did the viewers. He leaned back, swirling his cocktail. "So, Meghan, let's start light. How's life in California? You and Harry settling in?" "Life's wonderful," she answered quickly, her tone edged. "We don't settle, Andy. We create. We build. That's what we're doing. Building something meaningful, not just existing." A few audience chuckles followed, but they weren't warm. Andy caught the dismissive note, but let it slide. "That's great to hear. And how are you and Harry? The tabloids speculate constantly." Her smile tightened. "We're perfect. Unlike what the tabloids invent, we have a strong marriage. People should stop obsessing over what they don't understand. The audience shifted. The defensiveness in her voice was clear. Andy pressed gently. Of course. But fame comes with curiosity, right? Curiosity is one thing, Meghan shot back. Invasion is another. The public acts entitled to every detail of my life. My marriage, my children. It's absurd. Andy raised a brow, but kept his tone calm. Fair enough. Still, since you mentioned family, your father's been in the press again, saying he wants to see his grandchildren. Any chance of reconciliation? For the first time, Meghan's polished smile cracked. Her jaw tightened. Andy, my father has sold lies to tabloids for years. He chose publicity over family. That chapter is closed, the audience murmured. Andy leaned forward slightly. So, no possibility of him meeting Archie and Lilibet? Her eyes flashed. Why would I reward betrayal? Would you welcome someone who humiliated you into your home? Exactly. Let's not be naive. The temperature in the room dropped. Andy stayed steady, sipping his drink. Some might argue family ties are different, worth preserving. They can argue all they want, she snapped. They haven't lived my life. I'm tired of people pretending they know what it's like to be me. Andy smirked subtly. He'd found the crack in her armor. Meghan was already defensive, and it was only the beginning. Switching gears, he asked, let's talk royal life. When you first joined the family, you called it overwhelming. Some say you weren't prepared. Her laugh was humorless. Prepared? You can't prepare for an institution that's centuries old and out of touch. It's archaic, suffocating. I adapted better than anyone could have. Andy leaned closer, voice still smooth. And yet, the British public didn't exactly embrace you. Why do you think that is? Because I was different. Because I challenged them? Because I wouldn't bow and scrape. That's their problem, not mine. The audience gasped. Even Andy tilted his head, intrigued. He'd seen plenty of bravado on his stage, but rarely this much defiance. As the cameras zoomed in on Meghan's sharp expression, Andy realized the show was already off the rails, and they weren't even halfway through. After a tense commercial break, Meghan adjusted her blazer briskly, while Andy lounged with his cocktail, unfazed. Welcome back to Watch What Happens Live, Andy announced with a grin that carried steel underneath. We're here with Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex. Let's take this a step further. He glanced at his cards. Before the palace, before Netflix, before all this, you were an actress. Suits made you recognizable. Do you miss that world? The auditions? The Hollywood hustle? I don't miss anything, Andy, Meghan replied, clipped and cool. I've outgrown it. Acting was a stepping stone, not a destination. What I'm doing now has far more impact than playing a paralegal on TV ever could. The audience drew in a collective breath. Andy's brows lifted slightly. He knew the night's drama was only escalating. Interesting, because a lot of your fans actually loved you on that show. Some might say it was the foundation that made everything else possible. Meghan gave a short, humorless laugh. With respect, Andy, my foundation is who I am, not what role I played. If people think I'm defined by a television show, that says more about them than it does about me. The condescension in her words was unmistakable. The audience shifted again. Andy didn't flinch. All right, he continued smoothly. Let's talk about your marriage then. The public fascination is, well, endless. Harry and Meghan, you two are global brands at this point. But with that comes rumors, strain, distance. Are you and Harry as solid as you say you are? Her expression hardened. I'm not sure what kind of question that is. Of course, we're solid. The rumors are noise. We don't listen to noise. Honestly, it's laughable that people think they have any insight into our marriage. Andy leaned forward slightly, voice calm but pointed. So, no truth whatsoever to reports that the two of you have been under pressure. That California life, media scrutiny, even your own projects, none of it has created cracks. Meghan's smile returned, but this time it was icy. Andy, let me put it simply. We are stronger than ever. If people need to invent fairy tales to make themselves feel better about their lives, that's their business. But our reality is love, commitment, and partnership. Full stop. The audience murmured again. Not applause, not cheers, just a low hum of discomfort. Andy let the silence stretch before he moved on. Let's go back to your time in the UK, he said, carefully. There were, shall we say, mixed feelings among the British public. Some adored you. Others were less welcoming. How do you see it now? Meghan's eyes narrowed just slightly. I see it as prejudice, plain and simple. People weren't ready for someone like me to challenge their outdated traditions. They wanted someone docile. That's not me. And yes, some of the hostility was racism. Let's not sugarcoat it. Her words were met with a hush that swept across the studio. Andy's tone remained steady. And yet, some critics argue that it wasn't about race, but about attitude. That the way you carried yourself, the decisions you made created friction. What do you say to that? Meghan's answer was sharp, defensive. That's exactly what people say when they don't want to admit bias. It's not about race, it's about her attitude. It's a convenient excuse. The truth is, I walked into a centuries-old system, and they didn't know how to handle someone like me. So, they turned me into the problem. Andy's smirk returned, faint but noticeable. But do you think you bear any responsibility at all? Any self-reflection on how your approach might have contributed? Meghan leaned forward, her voice cool but dripping. With disdain? Responsibility for being myself? For not bowing low enough? For not smiling at the right moment? Please, if being authentic is a crime, then I'll plead guilty. The audience gasped softly again. Andy swirled his drink, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. He had dealt with divas, politicians, and reality stars. But Meghan's arrogance was beginning to exceed even Bravo's usual drama. Okay, Andy said lightly, though his eyes locked on hers. Last question for this block. You've spoken a lot about leaving royal life for privacy, and yet Netflix, Spotify, best-selling memoirs, interviews with Oprah and beyond. How do you respond to those who call that contradictory? The word landed like a strike. Meghan's hands tightened on the armrest. Her smile flickered, then hardened. Contradictory? No. Strategic. We control our story. We share what matters when it matters. That's not hypocrisy. That's survival. Her tone was sharp, cutting, the arrogance impossible to miss. Andy gave a slow nod, setting his glass down. Well, strategic or not, it certainly keeps people talking. The audience shifted again, the tension thick in the air. The Duchess had shown her hand, defensive, smug, and unwilling to concede even the smallest flaw. And Andy Cohen, ever the professional, wasn't done. The storm was still building. The Bravo set shimmered in its usual playful colors, but the atmosphere was anything but light-hearted. Meghan crossed her legs tightly, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression daring Andy to try again. Andy, for his part, leaned casually against his desk, notes in hand, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "All right," Andy began smoothly. "Let's talk about one of the most famous interviews of the past decade. Your sit-down with Oprah. Millions watched. The world was transfixed. But since then, some of the claims you made have been, let's say, challenged." Meghan's smile didn't budge, but her jawline tightened. "I stand by everything we said in that interview. Every single word." "That was my truth, Andy." "Your truth," Andy repeated, swirling his glass. "It's a phrase you've used a lot. But here's the thing about truth, Meghan. It's usually just truth.